introduce Stacy Delp. Now, Stacy earned her bachelor's degree in communications from Monmouth University, but she went on to earn her master's in employment and labor relations from Penn State University. She holds both PHR, HRCI, and SHRM-CP, SHRM certifications. She's worked in both public and private sectors. She has a wealth of experience herself in HR, and she currently oversees the human resource function right here at North Star Vets among 3 locations. So she knows her stuff, and she's prepared a nice talk for you guys tonight. So without any further ado, Stacy, welcome.
Thank you so much, Phil, and thank you guys for joining us tonight. I don't know if you're here for me or if you're here for Bev, but hopefully you'll get a little bit of something out of everything that is talked about tonight. I thank you so much for joining us and spending your time here tonight. Hopefully, if you're in the line of this storm, you guys are home on your couches, cozy and out of the rain, because it looked pretty bad out there earlier. Thankfully, Phil and I have been in the office, so we didn't have to experience it. But again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. As Phil said, my name is Stacy. I've been with North Star just a short amount of time, but I've been in HR for nearly 15 years at this point. And for me, I have always held an HR role that was an HR department of one. So I have almost always had to do all of the research and evaluation on my own. I haven't really had a department to support me, so I can understand what you guys might be experiencing right now, who are doing people management without either HR support or an HR department. It is super challenging, and as if working with people wasn't challenging enough, COVID has certainly given us some wrenches here in the bucket. So I'm going to go over some things tonight. I hope that you'll all walk away with a key piece of information that will make your jobs a little easier. And also that you have at least one aspect of your organization that you can evaluate for improvement. And if you are somebody who isn't a people manager, it's something that you certainly can take as an employee, hopefully back to the person who is a people manager as a suggestion. I know from my perspective in HR, I love to hear from our employees. I encourage them all the time to bring things to me that they think would add value to our organization or their jobs. Because I'm not you, your people manager is not necessarily you, so they love to hear what would make you happy, what you think is improvement, and they love your participation in all things that is your organization. I tried to keep in mind that you guys may not be people managers, or you may not necessarily be HR personnel in creating the content for tonight. So if there's anything that I start talking about that you just don't understand, you need more clarification on, please feel free to ask those questions in the chat box. Phil's going to moderate that, and I will either stop and clarify at the moment, or we will answer all the questions at the end of the presentation and try and get you on the same page. So hopefully we can move through this pretty quickly, and you guys can get on to Bev stuff as well if that's not, if you're not here for me. But again, I hope that you all gain something from tonight that's valuable. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I think you all got the PowerPoint earlier and were able to look through it. So what I will go through here is this first one. I promised there was a rationale behind giving you a history lesson on HR. The reason that I started doing this is because HR has really evolved greatly over the past few decades. HR was implemented to support the owners and the CEOs of businesses in a way to create organization and to support employee needs, really to process paperwork, make sure things were filed, and that employees were being answered with the questions that they had. As we moved into the 60s and 70s, there was some change in the way HR was relied upon. So unions became a really big thing, and people started to realize that they could go to different employers and get different benefits, different work hours, different wages. And so HR started to have to try and look at those things. In the 70s and 80s, employees started to demand better support from the businesses employing them. So employers started to have to use HR to look at different things for benefits, not just retirement plans. In the 80s and 90s, they were now juggling the commitment and performance management. They were looking at benefits beyond retirement plans. And then they were also looking at the demands for the work-life balance that was starting to come into play. which then generated in the 90s and early 2000s, FMLA and ADA. So all of those leave benefits and protections to be able to take care of your family and yourself, and also the protection to be able to do your job, even if you weren't an able-bodied person. HR is now responsible for all of that, plus leave management and compliance. Fast forward to the 21st century, we're now looking at FMLA, ADA, fringe benefits, performance management, employee complaints, leadership coaching, training, you name it. So HR has really evolved into something much greater than just day-to-day papers, filing, and organization. And the reason that I bring all of this to your attention is because HR has transformed from a transactional department to more strategic in the 21st century. Transactional is all that day-to-day administrative function. So the preparing the policies, the recruitment, the processing and onboarding, and the benefit administration. So it's really just that point of service, taking care of whatever you're going to need to do today. Strategic HR is managing HR in a way that supports the company's long-term business goals and outcomes. So how does what's happening to me today affect what I'm trying to accomplish down the line? And just to give you an example, transactional would be, let me do this enrollment benefit for you and send it over so that you now have our company benefits. Strategic HR looks at the benefits and says, how can I use these and implement things that are going to give me the ability to recruit and retain top talent? So it's twofold. And like I said, transactional HR is how it originated. Strategic HR is how it's morphed. And a lot of the things that we're going to talk about tonight, your plan going forward is going to be based on where you are in HR and how you are in people management. So human resources is the title that has always existed. It is evolving at this point to be people managers, people operations. And I think for a lot of you, if you're in a smaller organization, a people manager is somebody who's probably also doing another role. They don't necessarily have HR as a title, but they are certainly a people manager in a lot of the aspects that they're doing. So what we're looking at tonight is you need to start at the base of your people management process. Are you in a transactional era or are you in a strategic era? And in some things, you may be both. You may be a transactional HR, you may be a strategic HR, but this is going to be the basis upon which you want to look at your plans moving forward. So now that we've talked about strategic and transactional HR, I just wanted to move into kind of where we are with recruitment and retention. So I know one of the greatest things that people are experiencing is a hiring crisis. It's never been more challenging to hire staff than it is right now. I think we're all barely treading water in this pandemic, even still, and there's less people available. And then on top of that, we have people completely just vacating their positions for a number of reasons. And as you can see, SHRM, which is the credentialing body, Society for Human Resources, did a study just recently on a number of industries to figure out, is it all across industries or is it target industries that are experiencing this? And what you'll see on this slide is that there are 40% of US workers who replied saying that they are actively seeking a new job. And then 49% of executives that were interviewed found that they are experiencing turnover more in the last 6 months than they have ever in the careers that they've experienced. So it's across the industries, it's everywhere. A lot of places are calling it the Great Resignation. And it's not wrong, but can we do anything about it is something I think everybody is looking at. And the answer is yes and no. There are certainly things that people have and reasons that they are leaving that there is nothing organizations can do about. You know, there's something intrinsic that they need that is not fulfilled. And, you know, as an organization, you can't change that. You know, if they really want to change careers because they're not fulfilled anymore, that's not something you can do for them. You know, if they're a vet tech and they really want to go work in a human hospital, you can't bring humans into your hospital. So you're not going to fix that for them. But if you look at the slide, there are a number of reasons that we can certainly look at and target changes in our organizations to help. So if you see 56% of the respondents of this survey said that their manager was the main reason that they were looking for another role. And to go a little further into that, their manager meant either their manager didn't handle the pandemic that well, and they didn't feel supported during their time in the pandemic working, or there were issues with their manager from the beginning and they just amplified during the pandemic. And it gave them the ability to then move on during this time. 53% of folks said that there was better compensation available. I think we're all acutely aware that with a lack and a shortage of staffing, people have gotten and organizations have gotten very competitive with their compensation. So that is certainly something that you may be able to look at as an organization, but maybe budgetarily you don't have the ability to do so. So I'll talk a little more later in the presentation on other options to offer when compensation isn't the way in which you can try and retain talent or recruit top talent. There are 42% of respondents said that they were looking for a better work-life balance. We will talk a little bit later about some options that you can target for a better work-life balance, but in part of that, there's going to be stuff that you cannot do. So, you know, if you are working in a veterinary practice, there's certainly not childcare available. You can't bring your child to the office necessarily. It's not really safe. You can't offer that for individuals if that's part of their problem. Wanting to be able to work virtually as a work-life balance. Obviously, if you're working as a veterinary technician or a veterinarian, the likelihood that you're going to be able to work from home is probably pretty slim as well. So that's something that we can't necessarily change to keep people here and to recruit top talent. Another 33% said that career advancement opportunities were a reason that they were looking for another job or seeking alternative employment. And that's something that maybe you could look at. Is there a career path that you could create for individuals so that they want to stay? But there is also the potential that there isn't the opportunity. You know, if you're a very small practice and you have one lead tech and 3 techs, there is only one position available for a lead tech. And until that person leaves, the vacancy isn't there for somebody else. So it's another thing that it may work for you, it may not. You have to evaluate your organization. And then another 33% came back and said that they really just had a desire to make a career change. Again, we may not be able to do anything about that. Now, if you have somebody in your organization that is a vet tech now, but wants to move into finance or payroll, and you could use that support, maybe that's something you could do for them. But certainly it's a very narrow window, and in the industry that we are currently in, there isn't necessarily a lot of room for shifts. We're not Google where we have 17,000 different departments for people to slide in and out of as, you know, it makes them happy. But I think what the most impactful thing I read from this survey was that there's a really disproportionate number of Black and Hispanic workers actively seeking new employment opportunities in comparison to their white counterparts. And what we find with that type of report is that there's often a lot of biases, either in the hiring process or within organizations, that we're not inclusive and that there are challenges happening for those folks that are forcing them to want to seek alternative employment where they feel welcome and supported. So what I wanted to talk about from that aspect is unconscious bias or implicit bias, which is a prejudice or an unsupported judgment in favor or against one thing, person, or group. They're often things that we've been told by society that are applied to certain groups or certain people because they look a certain way, because they're part of a certain group, they identify as something specifically. And we don't necessarily pay attention that these are things you know, that we're judging people on. And one thing that I like to use as kind of a general information piece or reference is colored hair, tattoos, and piercings. I think for a really long time, folks with any type of colored hair or multiple piercings or multiple tattoos were identified as somebody who was unprofessional. They may have been a degenerate, they're wild. They're just individuals that you don't want to employ. They belong somewhere else, but not here. And unfortunately, that's just not true. You know, those individuals are expressing themselves in a physical way, but that doesn't have any type of impact on how they do their jobs. And so I think that's one of those things as an unconscious bias. When we have a candidate walk through the door with green hair, we automatically are turned off and we say, we don't want that person. And even though we sit through the interview and we talk to them and we listen to all the skills that they have, part of us deep down, in a way that a lot of times we're not paying attention, says, you know what, she's just not the right fit, or he's just not the right fit for us. And it's often because of some type of unidentified prejudice or judgment. The next piece you'll see is the beer test. So this does not involve actual beer. We're not actually using a beer. We're not hazing anybody. But a lot of times, hiring managers and leadership use this test to find a cultural fit. And unfortunately, it's not the right way to do things anymore. And when I say the beer test, have you ever had an experience where you've had a coworker or you've been interviewing an individual and you just clicked with them? You had maybe the same sense of humor, or you had the same school that you went to. Maybe you grew up in the same neighborhood. There was just something that you had an affinity for that you shared. And it just made it very easy to talk with that person and, to really move forward in the conversation. That's what I'm talking about when it's the beer test. It's somebody that you feel that you would more than willingly go out with after work and spend time with because you feel that you are compatible. This was used really frequently in the past because it seemed like the best way to get a cultural fit so that you had staff that were comfortable with each other and would work together easily. But unfortunately, when we do this, we create a staff that is culturally all the same. A lot of times their thought processes are very similar. And it kind of puts us in a place where at best, we're just stagnant. We're not thinking out of the box. We're not thinking of unique ideas because everybody kind of thinks and feels the same way. But at worst, we create a discriminatory environment where people who are not like most of us that are existing in that culture feel very unsupported and kind of feel out of place. And that brings people to either not be hired because we're not looking at, I went to Penn State and I only want people who went to Penn State. Whereas you might find somebody who went to a local college or who went to a different college even that has the equal comparison to you in skills, but they think differently. They've gone through different processes. They were educated differently. And then we create a more welcoming environment. You have people who want to stay because there are other people and there is a welcoming of different ideas, different experiences, and things like that. So it's certainly something that I think is really important for you to take a look at in your hiring process. And in order to do that, I think there's a couple different things to eliminate that unconscious bias, that affinity bias, and to eliminate that beer test, that gut feeling we use to hire people. So we can do a couple things. The best thing I think is to sit down with your hiring manager and sit down with the department that you are hiring for. Have a conversation with them and find out, what does success really look like for that position? What skills does a person really need to have in order to do the job well? Have that skill set as a checklist for the hiring manager. They can then go through and evaluate each candidate based on competency and behaviors. That then leads you to competency-based and behavioral question interviewing. This starts to eliminate that affinity bias, and it starts to eliminate anybody having that gut feeling to eliminate individuals from the interview process. The other suggestion I have is to always use a panel for interviews when possible. So if you can, don't just have one person interview an individual. Have a few people in there, because then you start to create different views, different experiences, and you have a more well-rounded view of the individual when you start to go back and talk about who is the right fit. The other thing that's super important is training your hiring managers to be aware of these biases. I am not a DE&I expert. There are so many people out there who are, and there are lots of classes and consultants who will come out to your facilities and do this training for you, or they will offer it in a time frame that fits so you can do it on a computer. But it's really important to educate people really thoroughly on how these biases impact the culture of your organization and also the hiring process. And then the next thing that I think is really important is it's really great if you think that there's a credential that somebody should have in order to be successful in a position. And that's certainly not discriminatory to say you have to have a CVT to be hired. You have to be a DVM to be hired. But what ends up happening, and what people I don't think realize all the time, is if you don't identify these certain requirements and the financial impacts or the time commitments that people might have for them, it has a tendency to create a disproportionate advantage to different classes of individuals. So it's totally fine to say that you have to have X amount of qualifications in order to be hired. But it does create a bias. And so what we often, suggest to folks is look at those credentials. Are they super commitment heavy? Are they very expensive? Is it something that you can offer and say in the offer letter, within the first year, you have to get your CVT. We will pay for it as long as you pass on the first try. We will pay for the resources that you need to study for it, but you have to obtain it within the first year. And these are the things that you have to check off in order for us to reimburse you for it or to pay for it up front. And that starts to eliminate that disproportionate advantage, because then you open up a whole candidate pool of people who may not have had the funding to be able to go, or the ability to do the application. They need some support in how do I go about it? Where do I reach out? What do I have to do? Because you're supporting them in that. But you're also then getting a whole candidate pool of people who, after a year, now have this certification that you really think is necessary for them to be successful. And of course, it may not be a CVT. It may be something as small as they need to have this specific training, or you really think they need to go through this series of trainings. So saying that to somebody and saying, okay, I know you don't have them right now, but I need you to have these completed at the end of 6 months or whatever the reasonable amount of time is. That also creates a more open candidate pool of people who would be interested in working for your organization, because not only are you saying to them, I understand you don't have it now, but I'm going to help you get it. You're investing in them, and that is important to people. So those are a couple of things I think are really important to start looking at to eliminate biases in your organization and in your hiring process. Obviously, we could go into far more detail on all of these items. But as I said, I'm not a DE&I expert, and there is lots of DE&I free content out there if you feel like you are already further ahead than these particular items we just discussed on these slides. So the next thing that I want to discuss is, and this is also a recruitment and retention tool, is your benefits. So after we've eliminated biases in our hiring process and in our culture, there's also some biases that are kind of tied into medical, dental, and vision that you may want to look at. Medical has a tendency to hide these little caveats in there that eliminate certain things or increase the price for certain things that would potentially harm somebody who has a disability. So things like injectable medications. If you have any type of immunocompromised or autoimmune disorder that you need injectable meds, if you are a diabetic, sometimes those meds are not included in the prescription plans. So you want to take a look at those different things and make sure that they're all included. So things like occupational therapy, if children need additional support, things that might be necessary if a child is diagnosed with autism, additional testing if there is some other type of genetic disorder. Sometimes medical plans eliminate those things. And if you don't look closely at them, they become exclusive instead of inclusive. The other piece is same-sex marriages and domestic partnership. You as the owner have the ability to exclude or include those things. They are not regulated by the state. So that's something that you can also use as a recruitment and a retention tool by saying, we are fully inclusive. We do not discriminate. We believe that everybody should be protected, and we offer medical, dental, and vision to all of these parties. So that's one way to also eliminate bias and another recruitment and retention tool. But the other pieces that I wanted to kind of put weight on is benefits are going to be something that folks look at in addition to salary. So I know that salaries are super competitive right now. It's very challenging to try and compete, especially if you're competing against larger hospitals or organizations. But adding additional benefits for folks is going to be something that you can also use as a recruitment and retention tool. So one of the main things that we've been hearing people talk about everywhere is mental health. The pandemic has really put a spotlight on that and making sure that everybody is taking care of their mental health and finding mental health support within their communities. Something that employers can do is implement an EAP. That's an employee assistance program. So most of these are pennies per head. You're looking at probably, 50 to 97 cents for the most basic ones. And the most lucrative and ones that are super inclusive, you're looking at maybe $250 per person. So these are not super expensive plans that you can implement, but they're very extensive. So they offer mental health counseling. Some of them will offer up to 5 sessions for absolutely no cost to the employee. There are even plans out there now that offer a resolution-based model where the person can see a counselor for absolutely nothing out of their pocket until the issue is resolved. So offering that type of benefit to somebody. An EAP generally also includes financial counseling, legal counseling, elder and childcare resources, often at very low or no cost to the employee. It gets them started in the right direction. It's a first point of contact. And a lot of the ones that are more advanced also offer leadership coaching and counseling. So if a leader within your organization is having a hard time having a conversation with an employee about something or dealing with a challenging person, they can call that hotline and get some coaching to be able to go through that in a legal and appropriate manner. So it also gives you that benefit to help and support your staff. The other piece that I talk about with EAP is it's nice to lean on them as a leadership team when you have individuals who are experiencing some challenging things. When they bring it to you, it creates a type of liability in that you now have knowledge of their personal life. And if you have to take action against them in a disciplinary manner or dismiss them, oftentimes there's some challenges because you had information about some other things, and they could often say that you used that and that was the reason you let them go or you disciplined them. So instead of having to take that information and figure out what to do with it and become a counselor or a therapist for your staff, you can say to them, I'm so sorry that that's what's going on. Please let me give you something that's going to be able to help you. And then they can call and get some resources for whatever it may be. The other thing that a lot of companies have been doing is wellness incentives. So offering extended emotional or mental health support using things like mindfulness apps or Calm apps, subscribing to them for a year membership so that the employees have access to it for free. You can partner with gyms to do gym memberships or online exercise classes. And then mindfulness workshops or apps is another thing that employers are offering to their employees. Parking or transit programs. Another really big one is paid maternity and paternity leave. This is one that could also be a little bit more expensive when we look at what it looks like to budgetarily implement this. But this is something I hear very frequently. If I had paid maternity or paternity leave, I would never leave a company. I would always want to stay there. So that's a really big ticket item that's coming to light with a lot of organizations for retention and for recruitment tools. Student loan assistance is another one. I know there's a lot of talk of student loan forgiveness and things like that with the Biden administration, but it doesn't exist right now. So certainly putting in a student loan assistance program where you pay X amount of dollars towards their loan each month is something that I think would be a really great recruitment and retention tool to put in, and maybe less than trying to compete with salaries with other organizations. Childcare assistance or programs of that nature. So similar to the student loan assistance, you would offer a stipend each month for childcare or childcare programs. And then the next thing I wanted to talk about is paid time off. So paid time off is a really big benefit as well. And the first thing I think that everybody needs to look at is your staff able to take the paid time off that they have already? Are they eligible? Are they getting denied? And making sure that what time they've accrued is allowed to be used and that you're making your best effort to ensure that staffing is available for them to take that time. It's something through the pandemic that a lot of employers have had conversations about. They found that staff aren't taking their time because there's not as much to do, and that there is a flip side, staff are being denied frequently because there's not enough staffing to let them take their time. So this dials back to the mental health issue, and people need the time to rest. They need the time to care for themselves. So as an employer, you want to invest in that. You want to make sure that they are getting their time approved and they're able to take it, and they're not kind of hoarding it or getting denied so that they aren't able to take the rest period that they need. The other piece of time off that you can look at from a benefits perspective is increasing time off. So something that I've talked about here at North Star is adding additional time potentially to help staff. So we know in the beginning, money was really a nerve-wracking thing for everybody. At this point, people are so burnt out. Money, you could throw $1 million at them, and I think people would still be exhausted. Just mentally, physically, we're all just burnt out completely. So offering additional days of PTO, whether it's a short-term or a long-term incentive, is something you can definitely look at for your staff. And if it's something that you feel you want to do to be competitive with other organizations, you can put a 5-year plan into place, use that strategic HR, and add it so that it increases over the course of time. Maybe this year, each staff person gets an additional 1 day. And then over the course of 5 years, you've added an additional week to each tier of your PTO. So this is certainly something you can look at that's a little less expensive on the budget, but it may be comparable when you're looking at competition. So I mentioned a little bit about COVID with mental health and some of the other benefits that we were talking about. The other piece that I want to talk about is COVID. And I think for some people, this is going to be beating a dead horse, and I apologize, bear with me. It's just a small part of the presentation. But for those of you who don't have a resource, I want to try and give you all the support that I possibly can. And I know with COVID and people management, it's been super challenging. So I want to try and give you as much information as possible. So employer responsibility is going to come down to a couple different things. You want to do, before anything else, policies and procedures, and you want them to be written. So whatever you are changing to protect your staff or your clients, you want to make sure that it's written. They can always be temporary. You can put an expiration date on them, but you want to make sure that if you are going to put an expiration date on them, that when that expiration date arises, you evaluate if it still needs to be in place or not. So you take a look at it, either extend the expiration date, notify staff that it is being extended, or it then becomes termed and put away and no longer exists as a policy or a procedure. I know a lot of people heard Biden go on with his 6-step plan a couple of weeks back. I'm guessing probably a lot of you don't have 100 or more employees, so this won't necessarily affect you. However, I want to give you some information on what you can do outside of this plan. So the courts have ruled that you can, in fact, mandate the vaccine for your employees. Is this the best decision? That I cannot speak on. You have to evaluate the culture and the environment of your particular organization to figure out if this is the right thing to do. As the Biden administration has said, you can mandate the vaccine, they will mandate the vaccine, but then you can also ask for negative test results. So you can also do it that way. You can also leave it up to employees as to what they choose to do. If you decide to leave it that way, you can ask vaccination status. If you are going to ask vaccination status, you have to make sure that you are very careful with the information that you have. It is considered medical information. So if you are taking copies of vaccination cards, you need to make sure that those pieces of paper are going in the medical files and not the personnel records. If you just heard me say that there is a medical file versus a personnel record, and this is completely foreign to you, I can tell you that your personnel records are out of compliance. Medical records, as far as doctor's notes, leaves of absence, benefit enrollment forms, vaccination information, should never, ever, ever coexist in a personnel record. They should have their own file, and they should exist separately in a locked cabinet. So if you are asking for vaccination status, you want to make sure that it goes in that medical record and not in the personnel file. If you heard me say that and it's foreign to you, the first thing you should do after this conference is go fix your personnel files. If you are asking vaccination status for your employees, you may ask vaccination status for candidates. If you are mandating the vaccine for employees, you may mandate the vaccine for candidates. However, if you are not mandating the vaccine for your employees and you are not asking vaccination status for your employees, you cannot ask those things of your candidates. You can never ask potential employees to do more than what your actual employees are doing. So make sure whatever you're doing is fair across the board, it's equal, it's the same. You can also implement a mask mandate even though the states are not regulating them. You have a responsibility under OSHA to make sure that there is a safe and hazard-free environment, which means if you feel that clients are getting too close to employees or employees are working super close together and there's really no way to protect them, and you think the mask mandate will, you can enforce the mask mandate. And it can be for just employees, or it can be for employees and clients. You can require clients put on a mask when they come into your building. You can also limit the number of clients that come into your facility at one time. It doesn't have to be mandated by the state. So these are all things that you can kind of take into account and decide what works best for you. Because again, everybody under OSHA has a responsibility to provide a safe and hazard-free environment, regardless of your size. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about, and I think a lot of the organizations that are here tonight are probably too small to have to deal with FMLA. That would be 50 or more. They may be big enough to apply ADA, which is Americans with Disabilities Act. So ADA is that law that's in place. Obviously, like I said, employers with 15 or more employees are required to abide by this. And you're required to make sure that those with disabilities, my goodness, are free from discrimination and ensure that they're provided the same opportunities as everybody else. So oftentimes what's required is a reasonable accommodation. And the reason that this ties to COVID is what we're finding is long haulers under COVID, regardless of their vaccination status, are starting to fall under ADA. And they may be eligible for a reasonable accommodation under ADA. So a reasonable accommodation is going to be some type of change to an application, a hiring process, the key job functions, or the work environment that allows somebody with a disability who is otherwise qualified for the job to perform the essential duties. Now, what you're not required to do is implement anything and everything that somebody asks for. So with a reasonable accommodation, it often requires a medical provider to give a recommendation. Some things do not require a medical provider's recommendation. They are simply coming from the employee, and you have to enter into what's called an interactive conversation. And essentially what that does is make sure that you are not experiencing an undue hardship in making sure that you're accommodating the person. So for example, somebody who never had asthma prior to getting COVID may need to take additional breaks because the environment that they're in, they have a hard time breathing. They might need to go outside. Another example might be somebody who has now a thyroid condition or some type of mental impairment and a diagnosis with that. Maybe they need to amend their hours. They used to work from 7 to 5. They can no longer get up that early. They're coming to work late all the time. You may need to have that interactive conversation with them and say, listen, we're going to adjust your hours. And we think maybe 9 to 9 might be better for you. So those are the types of things that you might have to look at under ADA with COVID now that it's coming up. The other thing that I wanted to mention, and this goes back to the slide before, I apologize, I just remembered. Anything that you're implementing with your organization as far as COVID or mandatory anything, you have to make sure that people have a means of communication and a request area so that they can get an exemption for religious or medical reasons. So I will share forms after the presentation is over that ask legally allowable questions for people to have an accommodation, an exemption from any mandate that you might have for vaccine, for mask, or any type of mandate that you're putting in place for your organization. There are also forms that I can share that would allow you to ask medically reasonable and legally questions for ADA, whether it's COVID or non-COVID related. But this slide will at least give you the definitions of what you need to look at, and then you understand, you can then say to the person that they either need to bring you medical documentation or you enter into the interactive conversation in order to figure out, this person has sciatica, they need a standing desk, they bring you a $4,000 desk. Well, if you work for Google, a $4,000 standing desk is no big deal. But if you work for a small practice and you need a standing desk for your receptionist, $4,000 is a lot of money. So you may go back to that person and say, well, we can't buy you the $4,000 desk that has all the bells and whistles, but we can get you this $550 desk that will do the same thing, that will allow you to stand and allow you to sit. You just may have to push it up and down. It doesn't have, a switch that you just press and it up and downs itself. So that would then put you in the position to have accepted the accommodation and make it reasonable. And then you as the organization don't have the undue hardship of it's just too expensive and I can't do it. And the same thing would happen if you had to amend somebody's schedule. If it would substantially impact or disrupt your business, it's not something that you have to do, but you do have to have the conversation about how do you make this work for both of you. So just to kind of recap, everything that's going to be most important is going to be documentation. You want to make sure that everything you're doing is documented, your policies, your procedures, your handbook, everything is up to date, because that's going to be your first line of defense. If somebody comes to you and says, I did X, and you say, well, you were supposed to do Y, how did they know? When you go to mediation, they are always going to ask, how did that person know that that's what they were supposed to be doing? So you want to make sure any of your policies and procedures are clearly communicated to your staff. That is how people are going to know what's expected of them. Same thing with your clients. If you are expecting them to be vaccinated, if you're expecting them to wear a mask, if you're expecting only one person to come in, or you're expecting them to sit at the curb, you would make sure you communicated that to them. So you want to make sure you're communicating all of those things to your staff. Be as transparent as possible. When you make changes to things, make sure that it's communicated to them and they are aware of it. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about tonight, and I think it's probably the most important, is you guys. Are you aware and are you advocating for yourself? As your people managers, you're worried about advocating for everybody else, but are you taking care of your mental health and are you taking the time to rest for yourself? Because if you aren't doing those things for you, you're not going to be able to do all the people work that's required of you. So I just suggest, and I recommend at the highest level, that you do the best things that you can for yourself and set the example for your staff. And that is the end of my presentation. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope everybody got a piece of information from it. I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has or clarify anything that I've said. And again, I will make sure that I have still send out all of those forms that I talked about for ADA and for exemptions for medical and religious reasons.
Awesome. Stacy, thank you. That's fabulous, because now more than ever, people need to bring their A game to their recruitment and their employee retention. And these are all the levers that we can pull to improve what we're doing out there. So that was awesome. Now, if you are listening tonight, you're like, wow, this is great. I want to do those things. But I'm not quite sure where to find a EAP. We have in this meeting room with us, Dr. Kathleen Newman. Now, Dr. Newman, as you guys probably know, is the Strategic Initiatives Director for the New Jersey Veterinary Medical Association. And she is going to post a link in the chat. There it is. So the NJVMA has some of these benefits for small practices. And so you can go ahead and click through on that and log yourself in, and you've got access to that right now. So that's awesome. So thank you, Dr. Newman, for that. There's another question from Raritan Animal Hospital. They said, so if we're part of a VetCorps or VCA, one of these, are we a small company or are we really a big company? That's a great question, probably for a regional manager. I would think that usually a lot of these companies are centrally managed on their HR function, that kind of thing. Yeah. But that's worth asking.
So the larger corporation, if you're considered over 100 employees, it's definitely going to be based upon how you're classified. So if you are just an affiliated group, then you probably aren't. But if you are technically a larger corporation and you are just a satellite of that location, then yes, it's considered however many there are cumulative. So like if we looked at it, we might not have 100 employees in our Maple Shade location, but because North Star owns all 3 locations, all 3 of them are considered 100 employees. So you really have to, it would be a matter of how you're affiliated with that larger corporation.
Yeah. Right. And I'm sure there's lots of different models out there from ownership to, whatever. So, and
OSHA is also supposed to give us a lot more information on that, on really how they're classifying it, what the distance is, if it's multi-state, those types of things. They haven't given full guidance on that yet. So that over 100 employees group, we're all kind of just sitting out on a wire waiting for the further guidance.
All right, so I have a question for you, Stacy. So Dr. Stevens asked if we're a small company. All right, so Dr. Newman, she gave us some resources. The NJVMA has resources, but Stacy Delp, are there other resources that you would recommend to a small business looking to just kind of wrap their brain around?
So there are, I mean, there's a lot of ways you can go about this. If you're looking to put some money out there, you can always hire, and a lot of brokers have it too. If you have a benefit broker, they have a department or a group that does HR support and policies. They'll write the policies for you. They'll review them, make sure that they're legal, make sure that they apply appropriately to your group. And that's kind of a one-time fee. So you just pay for those projects. They also sometimes will use, you can use them for X amount of hours for no additional cost to ask some questions. And then if you're looking to really not spend any money at all, you can always use SHRM's website. So at the very basic level, they give you access to a number of things for support and policies. And then if you choose to, you can join it. And it's $295 a year, but you get access to all the templates, all of the research, all of the information that those of us in the HR community that we're reaching out and having conversations about, that we're doing surveys on, you get access to all of that information. So you can always use that as well. And you have that access to that at the tip of your fingers. You can do it from home. You can do it in the office. You can do it on demand. But they offer tons and tons of free webinars, templates for policies and things like that. So you certainly can go to SHRM's website. You can use it for free, but then if you pay, you certainly get more resources as well.